I felt oftentimes like the challenges in my life were roadblocks that I needed to overcome or fix in order to finally pursue what God had for me. And looking back now, I really see that they were more like guardrails, keeping me on the track I would never have said yes to.
This is the Live, Lead, Last podcast.
Welcome to the Live, Lead, Last podcast, where we help you live with intention, lead with conviction, and leave a legacy that lasts. I'm your host, James Duvall, and I'm really glad you're here for today's conversation. It's a meaningful one. But before we get started, let me invite you to hit pause, not on your leadership, but on the pressure. The 5-day leadership reset is a free, simple resource that helps you realign with what matters most. In just 5 short days, you'll get the clarity and confidence you need to lead from a place of grounded purpose. And you can start today at liveleadlast.com/reset. Now, today we're talking about something every leader will face at some point: the intersection of calling, resilience, and identity, especially when life doesn't turn out the way you expected. We're also diving into the challenges and opportunities of leading women, especially in spaces that haven't always known how to make room. Our guest is Kadi Cole, a leadership consultant, speaker, and author with over 25 years of experience developing leaders and building organizational health. Kadi spent years as executive director at one of the largest multi-site churches in the country and now advises churches and faith-based organizations through her consulting work. She's also the best-selling author of Developing Female Leaders and co-founder of the Momentum Marketplace Mentoring Initiative, helping churches invest in the next generation of leaders. What I admire about Kadi isn't just her insight, it's her integrity. Her story is one of grit, grace, and quiet strength. From navigating family health crisis to leading through personal loss and professional shifts, Kadi has stayed rooted in her calling. In this episode, she shares her journey with humility, depth, and a deep belief that what's possible when leaders are empowered, regardless of the gender or background. So let's get into it. Well, Kadi, it's so good to have you on the podcast. Thank you for spending some time with us today.
Of course, James. I appreciate you and Lisa. I love what you're doing. So I'm really glad to be here.
Yeah, well, we've been friends for a long time, and it's been awesome to just watch your journey and see, how your leadership and your influence has just continued to grow and expound over the years. So it really, even though we've been friends for a long time, it really is an honor to have you on the show and spend some time with you. So,
well, thank you, my friend. I feel the same way.
Yeah. Well, I'd love for you just to start out by giving kind of the Reader's Digest version of a little bit of who you are and kind of what you're doing in the leadership space right now.
Sure. Right now, I focus mostly on leadership development and consulting with multi-site churches or church leaders in general. I've lived in that space for a long time, almost 30 years. And so I spend a lot of time doing that now. I also do a lot of advocacy for female leaders in church spaces. So not all churches are real open to that. And so I try to kind of help make a headway for women. And I wrote a book on that. And so I speak and coach a lot on that as well.
Yeah, I'm excited actually a little later talking about women in leadership and what you're seeing in that space. But one of the things I really wanted to kind of dive in with you on this episode is just your journey in leadership and just in life in general has been pretty inspiring to watch how you have overcome and kind of continue to press forward. And, when I think about a resilient leader, I actually think of you because I think, especially recently in your journey, you've had to overcome a lot of stuff. So I'd love to, as much as you're able to, I know that you do a lot in the strat-op world and also in life planning. And one of the things you do in life planning is kind of take people on like a life graph, maybe their highs and lows and so forth. And so could you take some time and just kind of walk through your leadership journey and just kind of share for our listeners to get a little idea of what that journey, that pathway has looked like for you?
Well, thank you. That's a really great compliment from you. Well, I'm a very unexpected, reluctant leader. I would say about myself, I grew up in Montana in kind of a smaller town, blue collar world, kind of a poor family, single mom. And so we didn't have any language around leadership or even career planning or, goals or anything like that. I just didn't have any of that in my world. And so, but I think looking back now, I have some natural giftedness by God. I have sort of a drive and energy to make things better. I accepted Christ kind of going into high school. And so I had a real sense that I wanted to make a difference in the world, that I wanted to help people. And in high school, I really kind of found my leadership legs. And again, I didn't have language for that, but I loved to join the clubs. I was president of a bunch of stuff. I tried to excel at school. And so I think as long as there was a plan and a goal, I felt confident I could help us get there. And so it gave me a lot of great experience. And even as I went into college, just had a lot of great leadership opportunities and retreats and camps and trainings. I just absorbed all of that. And I went into nursing because to, again, help and make a difference. And that itself is a real strong female profession. And so for me, I had a lot of I look back now, I didn't realize it at the time, but I look back now, had a lot of really strong, particularly military women who just commanded a room, led without apology, held people to high accountability. And that really formed my leadership. I volunteered a lot at my church at the same time. And so, especially when I moved to South Florida, the church I attended just really believed in me and saw leadership in me. So they gave me spiritual leadership. I oversaw led small groups. I oversaw our weekend production team and the drama team back when that was cool. That tells you how old I am. But I learned how to do worship production. I learned how to run the singles ministry. I learned about praying with people, leading people to Christ, discipling people. I just got a lot of training and I loved doing that. I loved knowing how to do the right thing to help someone.
Yeah.
And so that really laid a framework for me. From my hospital time, I actually was a psych nurse for several years in the VA, which psych nurse, it turns out, is really exceptional training for ministry, probably potentially better than seminary. So it was great experience. I worked at a university and eventually became dean of students and picked up a master's degree. So I think for me, I love to learn. I wanted to help. There were often vacancies ahead of me that were open, that I was sort of the easiest person to put in, or I looked like I had potential and I was a willing volunteer. And so most of my leadership, both at the university and then when I started working in full-time ministry where we met, there were just a lot of needs. And I loved to meet those needs. And so I was given a lot of opportunity. I learned a lot of things on the job. And that's kind of been my mode operandi, I guess I would say, in leadership development.
Yeah. So I know that, I don't know how many years ago it was, but your husband at the time had a really bad accident and you actually had to step in and kind of lead the family, lead at a higher level, kind of be the primary breadwinner and so forth. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges with that and what that brought out in you?
Yeah, I think on the personal side, again, I didn't really see myself as a leader. I didn't have any real vision from God that I should do something big. I was kind of just wanted to be faithful and love people. But yeah, life dealt me a few curveballs that kind of ushered me into leadership. And so when we were married, we'd been married probably about 5 years. I was pregnant with our son. We planned to have a big family. I was going to be an amazing stay-at-home mom. We were probably going to adopt a bunch of kids. I had a big vision for that. And a part of that is my own growing up experience of just seeing women thriving in motherhood was kind of the only example I really had of what it meant to be a godly woman or how to make a difference was to get married and have a big family. And so that was in my mind for myself, again, a little bit unconscious, but definitely driving me. And so when he had his accident, he really wasn't able to work for a long time. He went on to have just decades of mental and physical health challenges that we navigated. I'm grateful I went into nursing. It helped me a lot in knowing how to take care of him, but I was doing a lot of caretaking at home. I ended up having to go back to work full time way before I thought I would. And then we ended up with we decided to have only one child because of all of that. And so that did sort of force me into full-time career mode, which I never saw for myself. And looking back, I wish if I could have gotten my head around that, probably would have had dreams or desires or a direction I wanted to go. Instead, I was just kind of available to whatever needed to happen. And so we were working at the church at the time. And so I really was just up for whatever was needed. So when the parking lot needed done, I can go figure out a parking lot. And when young adults needed reworked, I can join the team for that. And when we decided to explore multi-site, I spent a year on a plane kind of looking into all of that and trying to understand how it worked. And so eventually that just gave me a really broad landscape of experience in ministry. And so when the church was growing, just like you, I grew in leadership with the church. And when our lead pastor took over most recently, I got invited to join the executive team, I think because I had that well-rounded view. And then, I think looking back, that's one of the lessons I've learned in leadership is I often viewed those things like having to work full time, needing to take promotions that were maybe bigger than I thought I should do, stepping into roles that I questioned whether I should do, whether a woman should do. It really challenged a lot of my thinking, but I, in many ways, felt like I felt like God was calling me, but I also felt like I didn't have a lot of other options. And so I felt oftentimes like the challenges in my life were roadblocks that I needed to overcome or fix in order to finally pursue what God had for me. And looking back now, I really see that they were more like guardrails, keeping me on the track I would never have said yes to.
Yeah, that's awesome. I just think that's amazing because I think in my own journey, I have that same feeling. It's like there's things that happen. You're like, I'm not sure why that happened, but in hindsight, you can see that it was providential or that God's hand was on it or that there was a reason for it later in life that you didn't see at the time.
Absolutely. And hindsight comes with in the rearview mirror. You know, it's not something you can see. You can't even see it at the time. The ways I justified it to myself in the moment ended up not being at all what my perspective is now. And then, you know, I led in church then for almost 20 years. And then most recently during COVID, so I lost both my parents in COVID and during that time. And then my husband, sort of like most people with mental health challenges, kind of took a downward turn. And so he ended up leaving our family and then divorcing me. And that was, especially after 20 years of real consistent care and really holding out hope for a miracle for him and for our family. That one really kind of it surprised me. I think that was the other piece. I did not see it coming. And so that sort of low point just changes a person. And so even my view of leadership now, family, calling, all of those things get shaped by challenges like that. And I really thought I was done in ministry. It's one thing to be a woman in ministry. That's hard. To advocate for women is hard, but to be a divorced woman to me kind of felt like the kiss of death of my career. But God really, you know, I tried to do other things. I had a whole plan of how I was going to compensate, and the Lord just kept opening ministry doors. I was really upfront with my story because it's a very controversial issue. But people kept hiring me, and those other doors I thought I would pursue ended up closing. And so here I am still in it, kind of surprised myself, but it's been quite an experience the last 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing because I remember going through that. And I remember when you were talking to us just about like, hey, this has happened. I don't know if all my clients are going to drop off because, you know, it is kind of this big issue in the church world and so forth. But there were a few leaders who kind of came around you at that time, right? Like a few pastors in the world that like kind of, we use the word liberate. They kind of empowered you. They, you know, fought for your highest good in that space. And how was that as a female leader in this space that have somebody else come around and empower you in those places?
It changed the game for me, really. And I think some of them were very simple. So like my pastor looked at me just square in the eye when I gave him an update that my marriage was definitely ending and my husband wasn't coming back. And he looked me square in the eyes and he just said, Kadi, you have done everything a godly woman would do. You've hung in longer than I would expect my sister or my own daughter to. And I want you to know you have a place of leadership here. This does not disqualify you. And I will have your back for anyone who calls and wants to know this side of the story. And just that approval and saying those biblical phrases and words to me, I really needed that, especially from someone in spiritual authority over our family. So those were important things. And then also really practical things. So I had some people that I called and I was like, well, what do you think there's any way I can make this work? And they were all kind of like, I don't think so. I don't think churches will go for this. And so when I called churches to kind of update them and let them out of their contract with me, I had 3 or 4 lead pastors just say to me, I am so sorry you're going through this. They really pastored me in the moment. And they said, we actually don't want to end our contract with you. We think what you have to offer is maybe even more important now because of what you're learning. And so continued to hire me, continued to have me come and speak. I had one pastor who probably most Christians would know of invite me to their conference and to speak on the main stage. And when I gave him the update, he just said, you know what? We aren't cancel culture people. We don't think one moment that someone else does in your life prevents you from the ministry and calling God has on you. And so we hope to still see you. And just those kind of responses that were very affirming and very, empowering and believed more for what I still had to offer than I could really feel at the moment. They kept me going personally, but they also kept me going practically. Like I had to keep my business going. And so hiring me made a huge difference to be able to stay in the game.
Yeah. It feels like from all vantage points that your business and your coaching and leadership has just accelerated from that day. I mean, it hasn't slowed down and God's opened up more and more opportunities for you.
Yeah, I think God just did some miracle things too. The day my divorce was finalized and I was really set back by that experience and outcome, I had a pastor who I'd worked with 15 years previously. I hadn't talked to him in probably 6 or 7 years, call me out of the blue and say, we have a project. We've been trying to get someone to lead it. I had breakfast with my investor, like the business partner for it. And we both think you're the person. Would you come take this job? And it was a significant contract for me that lasted 3 years. And so just doors like that opened, and their understanding again of my situation where I felt pastored in the moment, but they still wanted me to come.
Yeah.
Those things were real encouragements from the Lord and from the community people around me to keep going.
Yeah, I want to dig in just a little bit on the idea of resiliency though, because if even going back before, after the accident and you were the primary breadwinner, really fighting for your place in leadership as a female leader. And I know at that time you were leading at a very high level, higher than any other female in our organization at the time. So you were kind of pushing boundaries in some of those places, but then having to also be the caregiver. It would have been easy for a lot of leaders just to kind of throw in the towel and kind of go, there should be some other way, easier way to do this. What was it in you, or were there any things that you learned about yourself or that you applied that just helped you continue to move forward with resiliency? And then even after the divorce, like it's a big hit and people came around you, but you still had to have the internal fortitude to kind of go, I'm going to keep pressing forward. I'm going to keep moving forward. Any thoughts around that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, and I think, I did have a lot of people come around me in both those situations, but I had more people not want me in leadership in both those times. So I did have people support me when I was, leading at a higher level and showing up in rooms of only men and the only female there, and most people thinking I shouldn't be there. And then even after divorce, I had a lot of people who have expressed real concern or, walked out of rooms I was speaking in because of their beliefs about that. And so I think in those spaces for me, it always comes down to my understanding and belief that God is in charge of my life. And I'm not really called to make an impact. I'm called to invest in change and in people. And God really is in charge of the impact or the effect of that. And so, and I don't always know what that is at the time. Sometimes I think I made a big impact, and I think God probably looks at it and goes, that's not nearly as big as you think.
Yeah.
And other times I feel like I've made no impact, but I have a feeling there's going to be some of those moments that will all happen when we get to heaven, and we'll see that small thing was actually the biggest ripple effect we had that year. And so I think part of the resiliency, it's hard for me to think of myself that way, but part of that is trusting and knowing that my life is in God's hands, and whatever job I get or however my career goes or whatever my family looks like, and that's not always easy to live out, but however it ends up going, I can trust God in it. And even when I don't understand it, that part keeps me going. I was listening to the hymn the other day that was talking about, because he lives, I can face tomorrow. And I thought, gosh, that phrase resonated in me so many times, that because Christ lives, because he overcame all of these things, more than what I'm facing right now, I can face tomorrow. I don't know about the next day, but I can get up and face tomorrow. And I think that sort of faith posture and belief for many of us drives us when even when we feel like God didn't deliver the way we expected him to. And those are probably the hardest moments for me.
One of the things that's always frustrated me is knowing I should be supplementing my health, but with so many options out there, who really knows what's actually helpful? But recently I started taking LifePak anti-aging formula supplements by Pharmanex, and I've been really impressed. It's a comprehensive formula that supports everything from cardiovascular and immune health to your antioxidant network and mental performance. I've also paired it with Pharmanex's Age Lock Vitality, which promotes youthful gene expression and supports energy, focus, and even sexual health. As a regular endurance cyclist, I've noticed a real difference in my energy, recovery, and overall performance. And it's becoming part of how I live and lead with purpose. You can check out both products using the link in the show notes. I want to turn the corner and talk about this issue of women, especially in the church leadership. I think it's probably every place. You think, we're probably a little bit better off than we were a couple of decades ago, that there's more opportunities for women, but obviously the playing field's still not completely level. What are you seeing specifically in the church space, but you're probably intersecting with a lot of high level female leaders in the marketplace as well. What are you seeing in that space that is improving, or places that there's also still challenges that need to be overcome?
Well, the marketplace is still way ahead of the church, I would say, in this regard. In the church space, I'm actually really encouraged from the last probably 5 or 6 years. I think we're seeing a lot more doors open for women. We're seeing a lot more women take steps of leadership and own the giftedness that God gave them. We're seeing a lot of churches and church leaders really tighten up their culture. I've really tried to not be a theologian about this issue. I certainly have my own opinion about things, but I grew up in a very conservative background. I've led at churches that were way more egalitarian. I've been a part of a church with you that moved from very complementarian to egalitarian.
Okay.
And so I think women can and should be thriving in all of those arenas. We tend to struggle across the theological spectrum. And so what I see are male leaders really paying attention to that and doing a much better job, I would say, on making space for women, talking about the issue, opening up their own leadership to ask questions like, what is it like to be a woman in this place? What's it like to be a female on my team? How am I doing as a leader to make space and support and empower female leadership? I'm not a fan that every woman should be a leader, just like I don't think every man should be a leader, particularly in the church. But there are many women who have giftings and callings churches are not utilizing. And I can almost guarantee that church needs more leaders to reach their mission.
Yeah.
And so that space in between, we're starting to close, but there's a lot of dynamics about it. It is very challenging, especially if you're one of the first women to sort of break through and attempt to lead in those spaces. There's a lot of biases that we're unaware of in the church. There's a lot of biases that when I did the research for my first book, I was really guilty of bias against women, biases against myself. I had to repent of those things. So I understand why we're in this predicament, but I do think we have the responsibility and the capacity to change it significantly over the next 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, that's great. So I was thinking a couple questions I'll ask you. First of all, as it relates to if you're speaking to a male leader, what are 2 or 3 things that they could proactively do that would help empower maybe a rising female leader or up and coming female leader to empower them to be more effective or to continue to grow?
So the 2 most important things leaders can do, especially if you're in a church or faith-based kind of team or something, is to, first of all, really clearly define your theology. And what I mean by that is bring some clarity to all of the roles that you have open for women. I think one of the challenges is that when we talk about this issue, we tend to get really loud about the issues or the roles that we don't want women to be in, which even in conservative environments is really only like 1% to 2% of the roles in a church, where there are probably hundreds or not thousands of leadership roles. And instead get really loud about all the places that you would welcome women to lead. Small group leader, Sunday school teacher, in the greeters, in the ushers, helping serve on a team, helping in the construction world, helping in the capital campaign. There's so many places that women can and should be leading, and we need them to. But most women who you would want to be in leadership know that this is a thing. They know it's an issue. And if they are not sure where the line is of what they're allowed to do or not allowed to do, they will lead way below the line, because we all know that if we overstep the line, we come off as too aggressive. We come off as like overstepping our boundaries, like we're taking things away from men, wanting to grab for positions that aren't ours. And so we tend to go way below. So if your line is at like a 6 or 7, women in your church are probably leading at like a 3.
Okay.
And that difference between 3 and 7 is significant. That's hundreds, if not thousands of women and roles that you could have filled. And so clearly defining that and being really open about the number of roles you have open for women and how you want to see them flourish in your church, that can make a really huge difference. And then the second thing is to know some research about women leaders. One of my favorite pieces of research is called the 60-100 principle.
Okay.
And that is how men and women actually respond to leadership opportunities differently. So when a man looks at a job description, whether this is like on your staff or as a volunteer role or maybe a promotion, when they read through the job description, they have to feel confident of about 60% of what's on the job description, and they'll apply for the job. Most men feel confident that if they know 60%, they can do a great job. If they don't know what they're doing, they'll fake it till they make it, or they'll Google it. They'll call their dad. They can figure out how to do this job.
Right.
Women, especially female leaders, operate really differently. They have to feel confident of 100% of what's on the job description from the first day, or they will not even apply for the job.
Okay.
Think about that. How many jobs or promotions have you taken where you were going to do something new and you knew you could nail every piece of it from the first day?
Yeah,
like the whole point is we don't know what we're doing in a new job, but women take themselves out of the running all the time because they don't want to look foolish. They don't want to look like they don't know what they're doing. They don't want to embarrass themselves or their family. They don't want to embarrass you. They certainly don't want to disappoint God. And so they say all sorts of things. I have too much on my plate, or I really want to spend time with my family. They have all these reasons why they can't do something. But the reality is when we acknowledge that, and you, especially as a leader, have a great opportunity to sit down with someone and say, hey, let me talk to you about this opportunity we have. We're hiring someone to run First Impressions Ministry at one of our campuses. Here's why I think you would be great at this. First of all, there's only 10 things you need to know how to do. You're already doing 8 of them. You host a Christmas party for all this team. You already organize it. You already show up and encourage people. Like, that's most of this job. And the other things we want to teach you, we think you'll learn it. We'll give you a year before we even hold you accountable to everything on this job. You just got to not lower the standards from your standard, but lower her mindset to have a realistic expectation of what it is like to fill this job. When we do those two things, when we make clear what women are invited to be a part of, and when we help them right size the expectations and that sense of perfectionism that many women struggle with, when we help them right size what your actual expectations are and that they will probably exceed them without even trying. When we do those two things, we can really change the trajectory for women leaders in a church or a team or a business.
Yeah, that's good. One of the things that I feel like I see as a challenge for female leaders, well, a couple of things. I think one of the things I'm seeing is, first of all, a lot of the young female leaders are having to balance this thing between career and parenthood. And so there's, what the church needs to do to kind of give flexibility or the ability for that to happen. Because some of the, really strong leaders in a church or organization are female leaders. So how do they, I know the marketplace has, probably addressed that, but, the salaries and the financial compensation pieces, usually in nonprofits or the faith space, are not the same place. And then the other challenge I feel like I see a lot, maybe you can speak to this, is I feel like sometimes the lid on female leaders is often placed by other females. Like there's like this comparison, contrast, like competition piece. And I'm assuming that's just because there's just a sense that there's fewer opportunities. But what are you seeing how those things are being addressed in the spaces that you're running in?
Yeah, I would say compensation is a huge one. Definitely salary, and making sure that we're paying women salaries to people of the same scope of care. So one of the things I see a lot in multi-site is you'll have a children's director probably at one campus who oversees, 200 kids, which is probably like 150 families. And they're making less money than a student pastor at another campus who's overseeing 20 teenagers. And that's because of sort of pastoral status. But really, when you look at impact and value to the organization and the span of care they're carrying, we need to right size those salaries to at least be equal. But honestly, the children's director has a far greater impact on the number of families than the student pastor.
Right.
So those are things that are really easy to kind of just run an HR printout and compare those things and make sure you're what I call passing the red face test, which is if this got published, would you have a red face that you're embarrassed of what you were paying some people and not paying others? The second part to pay is giving housing allowance, which is when someone is credentialed as a licensed minister. Any church can offer to anyone who are providing spiritual care. There's a couple tax requirements for it, but it really makes a significant difference to income to a leader in the church that costs the church nothing. It's a tax break. And so just offering that to as many women as qualify makes a really big difference. The topic of women holding each other back is a very big one and a very important one. I would say the biggest resistance I've ever faced in my own leadership has been almost exclusively from other women. And there's a lot of nuance to it. There's a lot of comparison and competition. Yes. Most of the research coming out about that, there's been sort of labels to that. There's a queen bee syndrome and things like that, that women who do break through oftentimes don't want to help other women. What most of the latest research has shown is that if you are a woman who has broken through to the top, you often don't have time or energy to help other women. And most men think that men should develop other male leaders and women should develop other women leaders. And that's because we've sort of laid on this discipleship model onto leadership development, which could not be further from the truth. We need all people in leadership to developing all leaders of all genders and all ages and all races. If we don't do that, we're actually missing the people who know the most about leadership to develop the next generation. And so what we find is that women tend to compete. In fact, anyone, whether it's race or age or socioeconomic status, it gets very competitive when everyone has the sense that there's only a few roles available. So one of the ways we can counteract that is to not just promote one woman to a team, but to promote two or more to a team at the same time, to make sure that you're requiring leadership development equally from your leaders across the board so that they're doing consistent leadership development with both men and women equally. So an example of that would be, James, if you're overseeing a team of creatives and taking all the guys out for one-on-one lunches, but you're meeting with women for 45 minutes in your office, that's a very unequal way to treat leaders. And you get a lot more from a casual lunch, from the car ride, from the extra time, from the camaraderie. So if you can't offer it to everybody, then offer it to nobody. Meet with everybody in your office or have lunch with everybody in a place that you can have lunch with everybody. So that kind of consistency makes a big difference and helps lower the kind of threshold on that. And then the other thing is we can do a lot to help women who have been overlooked in their leadership. Usually resistance comes from women who are older, who have spent years labeling their leadership as sin and aggressiveness instead of leadership and teaching and prophetic voices and administrative leadership gifts. And so they've been told to harness that, to hide that, to hold that back in exchange for care element. Now they're seeing these young leaders get the microphone and they think they're being bossy when really they're just being great leaders. And so we can do a lot by really taking those older women and processing through with them and even apologizing for the leadership capacity we've overlooked or those who went ahead of us overlooked, and finding ways for them to find their leadership voice and to fulfill the calling that still remains on their life in your church. That goes a long way to really eliminating that competitive spirit.
Yeah, it's really good because there's a lot of, more seasoned leaders who have been trailblazers to provide the pathway for younger leaders that, like you said, never got the microphone, never got to do the things, but without them trailblazing, the young leaders may not be where they're at today either. So that's a really good talk. But you're talking about, just this idea of developing all leaders together and so forth. And I know you've been on a lot of podcasts, but you also are hosting the podcast, right? Together Project. Can you talk a little bit about that project?
Sure. So this is a podcast I produce to try and help church leaders do a better job developing female leaders. And this season, I'm interviewing high-level pastors, senior pastors, executive pastors who have made a shift in their own personal practices around women. So what we found in our research for the book is that, like I mentioned earlier, really theology had little to do with how well women were thriving in a church. What it really came down to were the personal practices of the individual leaders, particularly the senior leaders. And so I've had the chance for the last 5 years to work with a lot of great leaders and a lot of great churches who have made movement on this. And so they come on the podcast and tell their story of how they wrestled through theology, what it was like to hear some devastating news about their own leadership, the kind of women they have in their church, and some of the really strategic and practical things they're doing to make a way for women.
That's awesome. And does that air every month? What's the?
Yep. The podcast comes out every month. I do have a monthly newsletter that's got that comes out with it, as well as resources on this topic, things that I'm writing about this topic. So it's kind of an all-in-one, once a month newsletter for anyone who's interested in that.
Awesome. We'll put that link in the show notes. Okay. A few questions, just random questions for you. So as a leader, how do you personally, and when you're investing in all these leaders and churches and so forth, what are some things that you do to personally stay rooted or just, connected and healthy in your leadership?
Yeah, I would say it's interesting at this season of my life, I'm an empty nester now. And so I find my rhythms are adjusting again. And so the first thing I would say is I just want to give permission to leaders to reevaluate how you connect with God and how you stay sort of rooted and centered in Him and even in your own body and in your own relationships. For me, I'm a big sort of quiet time, meditative person. I've always been like that. So time in God's word, time in nature, prayer is really important to me. I think over the last, particularly 5 years, the right people in my life. And I would say I've always had a capacity for a lot of relationships that mean a lot to me, but I think I've become much more particular about who those people are in my inner circle and the voices and encouragement that I receive from that, and making sure those are reciprocal relationships, not just what probably were me doing a little more than half, if not more than that. And then, so I think those relationships. And then for me, I also think I try to stay very surrendered to what God has. And I would say a lot of that even got worked out in me even more in the last 5 years. I always believed things about my family life, God would do something really redemptive in it. So I never wavered from it. But realizing now that my story of redemption often looks different than God's story. And so even trying to hold a very open-handed, surrendered view of what I think God wants for me or for other people, He just keeps surprising me in that regard.
That's awesome. Okay, a couple more questions. So what's bringing you joy right now?
Son brings me a lot of joy. So my son Ethan's 21. He's just graduating and starting his career and about to make a big move across the country to start his adult life. So that's really fun. And then I actually am engaged to get married. And so that brings me a lot of joy. God sort of completely surprised me with another new love relationship, which I did not see coming. And so that's been a real delight this year.
That's awesome. Well, you deserve happiness and joy in your life. And so, and I know Lisa and I are excited about coming out and celebrating your wedding with you.
I know. So I'm glad you guys are going to be there with us.
One last thing, any quote or maybe a book that you're reading right now that's been meaningful to you that you just kind of hold on to or you'd want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, actually, a book you and I have talked about before. I've been working through this book a couple times over the last year or so, and it's by Dan Sullivan called 10X is Easier Than 2X. Mm-hmm. And for me as a leader, as a business owner, but even just as a leader in general, I think, and maybe this is true for other people, but I think going through some traumatic times and where I feel like I got hit with a lot of loss and unexpected betrayal that I just did not see coming. And one of my strongest leadership capacities is anticipating what's coming. And so it really kind of pulled the rug out from under me. And so it's taken me a while to find my footing again on dreaming big or planning for things to go well. And so that book has been a real game changer for me. And each title, just 10X is Easier Than 2X, thinking in terms of how to make things easier and how to make things bigger in my life. Friendships bigger, relationships bigger, my parenting bigger, my ministry bigger, and not bigger like up into the right success, but a bigger impact, a bigger heart, a more open life. That has been really impactful. And I think that combined with sort of the scriptural just thing I've been meditating on is just the offering of 5 fish and 2 loaves, right? Kind of the counterbalance to bigger is, and yet I still have this very small thing to offer. And so I think as I've been growing up in leadership, I sort of felt like you had to choose one or the other in life. I was kind of binary in the way I grew up. And I think I've carried a lot of that into my spiritual life with the Lord. And I think He's really challenging me to integrate a lot of these things, to think big and to stay humble. That's way harder than just one or the other. And that's what I'm working on these days.
That's amazing. You're the second guest I've had recently that's talked about 10X is easier than 2X. And I've actually just started rereading it for the second time. It is a great book. It's a great read. So if you haven't read that book, maybe, and you've been listening, probably a good hint to pick it up and read it. So
Yes, for sure.
Awesome, Katie. Well, it's so great to have you on the show. Where would you send listeners to learn more about you and what you're doing?
Sure. The best place to find me is either on social media at Kadi Cole or my website, and that's spelled Kadi Cole, KADICOLE.com.
Awesome. And we'll put those links in the show notes. Thank you, Katie, for being on the podcast. Appreciate you, my friend.
Thank you, my friend. This was great.
I'm so thankful for my friendship with Katie and for her being on the podcast today. And I hope you're walking away with a fresh perspective on what it means to lead through difficulty, live with resilience, and make space for others in the process. If you want to dig deeper into this conversation, be sure to check out Katie's book, Developing Female Leaders, and her podcast, The Together Project, where she interviews church leaders navigating culture, theology, and gender with intentionality and grace. You'll find those links in the show notes. Also, if you haven't already, take 5 minutes to start the leadership reset at liveleadlast.com/reset. It's the kind of intentional reflection that will help you build a sustainable foundation for your leadership. And while you're at it, make sure you're getting our weekly email, Rooted. It's short, strategic, and focused on helping you lead well without losing your soul. Just text GROW, GROW, to 66866 to subscribe. If this episode meant something to you, don't keep it to yourself. Rate it, review it, and share it with someone you know who's building resilience in their own leadership. You can also connect with me on Instagram or LinkedIn. I'd love to hear what stood out to you. Until next time, live with intention, lead with purpose, and never settle for less than legacy.